This is a Rough Tiger production.
And you, and you, and you, and you were there. Some of it wasn't very nice, but most of it was beautiful.
Howdy.
How do?
How do, folks? This is Dream Idiots, the Western. No, I'm Bryan. That's Morris. Welcome back, folks. This is another episode of Dream Idiots coming to you live. Not live.
Well, no, I guess not. All right. Hi, everybody. In the shadow of yet another mass shooting, I simply got a text from one of my brothers-in-law today that said, fucking Nazis. That's all it said. I can't make sense of it. I'm just without words for more of this horseshit and death. It is awful. And on that note, welcome to Dream Idiots.
Way to bring the room down.
Yes, can only go up from here.
Yeah. Fuck Ted Cruz, which that seems pertinent after the shooting in Allen. Yes, go on our merch site and get the Clear Eyes, Full Hearts, Fuck Ted Cruz T-shirt. I have that T-shirt. I wore it to the gym yesterday and got some grins. So gun violence. Yeah, no fucking idea when this horse shit's gonna end. Probably never, but we're gonna try to lighten the load anyway with more stupendous and ridiculous stories from Morris and I.
And speaking of which, you get to go first because it's episode 65, which is not a prime number, but it is divisible by 13, which is very cool. Almost as good as a prime number. Bryan, what do you have for us this week?
Well, I'll say first before then, thanks for all the stuff you're doing for us out there, for listening, subscribing, sharing, rating, doing all those things. Please keep it up. We appreciate it. Definitely have some folks out there that are sharing and are writing in as well. This week, episode 65, we're going to dive back into idioms, dream idioms, because a few weeks ago we dove into a bunch of foreign idioms and how they translate badly into English. I would love it if somehow we adopted the expression shitting in the blue cabinet as an expression. I just still think that is sort of genius. I want to dive back into it a little bit because there were some. This time around, we're going to kind of dive into some expressions, turns of phrase that I wanted to investigate to figure out, just kind of determine their origin. And most of them translate, I'm sure, terribly into any language. So we're going to start out with a few that I wanted to sort of kind of dive into in greater detail, and then from there we're going to move into. I had fired off requests in the podcast and online for folks to send in their regional idioms, their family idioms, expressions that they liked or had heard, and I've got a whole list of random things, some of which you will have heard of, some of which not so much, some of which are brilliant and fucking hilarious, and so I've been weeping just sort of compiling them. But we're gonna start with the half dozen or so that I wanted to look into, and Morris, you can guess and play along as you see fit.
Sounds good.
Okay. So first expression. The expression is mad as a hatter. Very common expression, been around for quite a while. You probably know, you're a well-read
British origin.
Person. You probably know the origin of this, right?
British origin, and it has to do with the fact that haberdashers used a lot of mercury at the time. Is that right? And the mercury would make you go a little wacko in your head, is what I've always heard. And so hatters would act a little crazy because of the mercury poisoning. And so you were mad as a hatter because of their intake of mercury, is what I've always heard. I don't know if it's true or not.
Yeah, you are spot on correct. I mean, sort of part two of that is Alice's Adventures in Wonderland, and the Hatter from that story
Right.
is
Mhm.
also kind of the other source for it. But you are spot on correct about mercury poisoning being the source of that. Next one was Fly by the Seat of Your Pants, a la Bessie Coleman, who we've spoken about on more than one occasion.
Uh,
So
well,
obviously the expression it means to sort of wing it, to sort of just kind of plunge ahead without sufficient preparation, maybe, or
sure,
to
play it by ear.
play it by ear. But
Yeah.
why is it fly by the seat of your pants? Why is it that expression?
Uh, I have no idea because flying without being buckled in, I have no idea. Because you wet yourself. I don't know
so
what is the deal with
so
that one.
in the early days of aviation, during the period of Amelia Earhart and Bessie Coleman, I mean, weather and I mean, flying was just a tremendous, incredibly treacherous proposition. And if you didn't know what the weather was going to do, or I mean, weathermen don't know what's going to happen. But at the time, you're flying by the seat of your pants. If you went up unprepared, you basically relied on the fact that your butt would feel vibrations in the plane. If there was lightning, or if there was if there was turbulence, you would feel it in your ass. So flying by the seat of your pants is really a very a literal translation.
Okay.
So the next one, the time is ripe, RIPE, or time is right, RIGHT.
Well, I've always thought that maybe ripe has something to do with fruit, maybe grapes and wine season. I'm not sure.
So this is actually an expression. I mean, so common usage is when you and I were talking about the time is right to do thus and such, is a basically a bastardization of the expression the time is ripe, and it is an agricultural thing. The reference is originally from a Martin Luther King Jr. speech from 1968 at the National Cathedral in DC, where he says the time is always ripe to do right. But that's sort of morphed over time because it's kind of hard to say that. And so the time is right is a spin on what MLK had to say, but it is a agricultural expression. The time is ripe because it's time to bring to harvest crops, etc. So it's something that got kind of warped over time from
Oh, okay.
the original.
So that phrase had been around before MLK, but that speech was kind of the point where it morphed
Yes,
into the
exactly
time
right.
is right. Okay, gotcha.
Right.
All right.
So midnight oil, burning the midnight oil.
You had to conserve oil. You didn't want to use it too much because it was expensive. It was costly. So if you burn the midnight oil, you were sacrificing something to get something else done, I guess.
Well, yeah, I mean that's essentially right. I mean the expression is you're pulling an all nighter. You're burning the midnight oil. But obviously, that's not literal. But originally, back before electricity, if you had to stay up all night for something, you did literally have to burn the midnight oil because that was your only source of light. So that's sort of the source of it. But it's just been bastardized into this expression that doesn't obviously doesn't hold. It doesn't make any sense anymore in the 21st century. But the source of it was 100 years ago before electricity. That's what you had to do.
And then beds were burning because of the midnight oil. So,
Exactly right. There you go.
okay.
People fell asleep reading all the time and would burn themselves to death. That really was apparently a very common problem. Um. So the icebreaker, breaking the ice.
Shipping term, I guess. The ship used to go in front of other ships to break up ice in wintertime when you're shipping
Yeah.
things.
It obviously becomes a the icebreaker, or is the parlor game or the activity that's used to kind of ease passage for social interaction, icebreakers in shipping, go ahead of the larger vessels to ease passage through the ice. So that's where that comes from. To handle with kid gloves. I mean, what are kid gloves?
Is that a reference to like kids as in goats? I've always wondered about that. Is it? Okay, I've always wondered about that.
It actually is, yes.
Because they're softer and more supple than regular gloves, I'm guessing. Okay.
Yeah, I had long assumed that kid gloves was handling like your kid or a child is to be you have to be softer or more careful because you're dealing with a child versus I had no idea it was a goat reference. So yeah, you're totally right.
A goat component.
So making the grade or succeeding as the word grade in terms of grading.
The first instinct is to think about teaching and learning and schooling grades, but does this have to do with like grading a road or a hill grade?
It does. So this expression has to do with trains. So 100 years ago,
cool.
over 100 years ago, when in England and in the US, when they're laying down tracks, they're working very, very hard to make sure tracks are as straight as possible and have as little change in elevation as is humanly possible, because you could have a train that weighed close to 1 million pounds, and getting that fucker up the hill was difficult. And so you had to plan ahead and make sure that you had enough power and traction to, quote, make the grade, unquote. And so that really does appear to be the source for grading in school. So A through F is making the grade, grading your effort. That appears to be the source of that term.
The main reason that comes to mind is because you see that up here in the mountains all the time, up here in Colorado.
Oh, 6%
right. Grade ahead and that kind of stuff when you're going over the passes and stuff.
Yeah, in the ice and stuff, right? Sure.
Yeah.
This one actually completely blew me away because it's just so ingrained in our generation and people that are younger than us. Surfing the internet, surfing a web page, or net surfing. The idea that being online is surfing versus some other activity.
Well, I mean, the inclination is to go with, the only surfing I can think of is windsurfing or surfing, like surfing, Beach Boys surfing. But
yeah, I mean, I've
never made that connection before. So
yeah, but my source in this doesn't quite even really explain this necessarily. There's a librarian where this I don't know, this blows me away, and it really shouldn't. This woman's name is Jean Pauley. She was a librarian, assistant librarian in 1981 at the Liverpool Public Library in Liverpool, New York. And she was one of the few people that was advocating that public libraries have computers and internet access in the 80s. So you had message boards and the early crap like that. Most librarians were like, no, we're not doing that because that's gonna crush our business. But this woman just coined the term. She published a book in 1992, which just seems incredibly late to me. A library journal that was titled "Surfing the Internet: An Introduction," and that was the first usage of the word. But she doesn't really quite explain. All she says is she recalled that the term felt appropriate because, quote, "It's hard. You need some skill. You never know if they're going to be sharks." Like, well, okay. So I don't know. Something that's so wildly ingrained into our vernacular is just something that this woman just conjured out of nothing. Okay. One more here that I thought was crazy old, but is surprisingly new. The term eye candy. So eye candy is obviously just a general term for something that is superficially pretty with no with no depth and having that's transparent, right? So the term eye candy, there's a woman named Jenny Ruffner. She was in a car wreck. She worked as a glass artist. She's in a car accident in 1991. She lapses into a coma. She's left partially paralyzed and had really, really significant memory loss, including she didn't know who she was. She said later on, quote, "I was terrified. My mind was like a big empty house that you knew who used to live there," unquote. In order to stimulate her memory, she had several friends that were fellow glass artists. They sent her a bouquet of eye candy. So she like this huge bowl of blown, well said, Bryan, blown glass spheres of just like different colors, plaid, stripes, polka dots, and there's made by her friends, and someone termed this artistic display eye candy, and it was just a trick to stimulate her brain and help her just to inject something of beauty into a sterile environment. And she then apparently coined the term eye candy in 1991. I'm sorry, 1994. Because she later on put together an art exhibit called Patterns of Thought Eye Candy with her partner in 1994.
Wow.
Yeah. So
that's quite a sublime origin for a word that has, quite frankly, rather vacuous.
Yeah, it's a very dismissive sort of insulting
right
term.
Be it people or cars or whatever.
Right.
Yeah, it's
right. It's not a compliment. So anyway,
yeah.
So those are the ones that kind of caught my eye that I wanted to dive into in greater detail. One more here. The expression "you can't tell shit from shinola." Any idea what the
that's
source?
a good one.
What the source on that is, or what that means?
Wasn't shinola like a shoe shining product?
It was. So 100 years
Yeah.
ago, the very early 20th century shoe polish that apparently looked like diarrhea in the tin. And
well, the original product name was diarrhea in a can, but it didn't go over well. So
and so it became sort of a popular military term for would you'd ream out some private who didn't know shit from shinola when they fuck something up. But great expression.
yeah, it isn't. Sorry, go ahead.
No, go ahead.
Well, I mean, I guess the corollary to that, or the parallel to it, is you don't know your ass from a hole in the ground, right? Very, very colonic, very fecal.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Okay. I'm sorry.
And so now I've sort of interspersed here some other ones that I liked, and also these are some of the ones that I started collecting from people that were friends of the pod or people that had just written in other expressions. I mean, I got a lot of expressions that were frankly kind of benign, kind of boring. Two peas in a pod. Yeah, I don't care about that. So I don't really. Some of them I dismissed or may save for some other time. We have from Todd wrote in and said, "Oh, you should reference the term 14er," which, as a Colorado person, you know what a 14er is.
Yes, it's one of the mountains along the Front Range. Actually, not just the Front Range, but any mountain in the area that is above 14,000 feet.
Right.
And some people make it a hobby of, quote, bagging 14ers, which means you've hiked the top of the 14ers.
Right.
Yeah.
And he wrote in and said they're in the lower 48, something like, I don't know, 50 of the 70 14ers in lower 48 are in Colorado. So people apparently really keep score.
Yeah, a lot of the places actually have like we have a lot of Colorado themed stores here, and they actually, what I've seen is they have a scratch off map where you can scratch it off like a lotto card once you've done it, and you can get it framed and put it on your wall and stuff like that. So
that's cool.
Yeah, it's pretty neat.
So the next one is 86 or 86ing something. You worked in restaurants, so I think you probably know what this means.
Well, the 86 something is to throw it away, right? Or to get rid of it.
When something is 86, it means you're out of it. And so there are two references here that kind of are saying different things in terms of what the source of this is. So there's a restaurant in New York City in the 19th century, restaurant called Delmonico's. It says this restaurant opened in 1834. There were over 300 entrees on the menu, and the 86th item on the menu was a ribeye steak that was really popular. And it was so popular it would often sell out, and so 86 became the default term for something that was sold out. But then I also read that in the field, and when you're feeding military, a standard pot of soup or something that was being fed, or oatmeal, whatever, being fed to troops, a standard pot held 85 cups. And so if you were the 86th person in line, you were fucked. so same thing, but different source. So hard to know which one is correct. For my days in working in restaurants, I used to, just to amuse myself, there was always, back in one of the wait stations, there was a in the one little French restaurant I worked in San Antonio. And someone during the course of the evening, someone would write 86 and underline it, and then would write underneath it whatever, veal tetrazzini was out. But occasionally, because I thought it was funny, I'd come through and I would erase 86 and change it to 69, or I would erase 86 and change it to 2112, or I'd change it to some other random number. I'd put 10101110, which is 86 in binary. And people were like, what the fuck's that? They wouldn't get it. One of the assistant managers there was this woman who was she had to be like 6'2". This tall, blonde Nordic woman who I was convinced that we were gonna run off and get married or something. And she had this really delightful way of, if you could get her laughing hard, she wouldn't make a sound. Her mouth would kind of fall open. She would cover her mouth with one hand, and she would just start to sob. If she was really, really laughing hard. One time I walked through the wait station, and then after 86, I wrote 875309. And then she saw it, just was weeping, laughing at that. No one else seemed like, what is she laughing at? And then on one other occasion, at some point in 1989, Ted Bundy died. It was kind of in the news, and so at the bottom of the list, it said 86 minestrone soup, pork tenderloin, and I added Ted Bundy. that got some laughs as well. But that was, I think, another
good one. 86-OU812 would be another good one.
Right.
Well, not for the Ted Bundy part, but
so
86. I'd always heard the military, but I never knew there was a restaurant connection. But I didn't know about where it came from. The military, I just always heard it as military thing. So that's
interesting. The military one. The military one, frankly, seems kind of more likely. I'm not sure why I think that. So we had one expression here that was sent in twice from a friend of the pod, Louisa, and then also a woman named Laura sent in the expression that they both indicated parents used, which was, tell them how the cow ate the cabbage, which is a
I know that one. Yeah.
You've heard, okay. So it's giving a piece in your mind, basically. And then Laura, whoever the hell she is, offered up, save your breath for cooling your soup. Kind of the same expression, I guess. Just kind of giving them a what for, I guess.
Save your breath for cooling your soup. No, that to me that means kind of the opposite. Save your breath for cooling your soup means shut up. Doesn't it? I mean, yeah, that's good.
I guess that does mean, that makes more sense. Then I looked up, so there's fur piece, FUR, or far piece. If you Google that, I've been saying fur piece jokingly for my entire life. One site very very definitively says a fur piece is 50 miles, and then another site says a fur piece is 2 to 3 miles. Like, oh, okay, guys, you need to figure out how long a fur piece is. Whatever it is, it's a long way, supposedly. A few more from a semi friend of the pod, John P. Wrote in. There's a theater reference where you just yell heads, which I don't recall. Heads is just watch your head. There's lights are coming down, or just mind what's above you, basically.
No, it's also the first line of Rosencrantz and Guildenstern are dead. So
that's true too. Yeah. Flotsam and for some reason I just love this for some reason. Flotsam and Jetsam. So Flotsam and Jetsam are Flotsam and Jetsam is also apparently it's a like an 80s thrash metal band from Arizona. But in terms of an idiom, it's often used as obstacles, whatever, detritus, the things that are in your way, things that are in your way in whatever task you are approaching. Do you know what Flotsam and Jetsam really is?
Flotsam and Jetsam, it's things that wash up. Jetsam and I can't remember which is which, but one is inanimate matter and the other is animate matter, like vegetation, seaweed, and the other is pieces of a boat, right?
Actually, no.
Oh,
you're broadly in the right area, but
I got the right ta but the wrong ho ho.
Yes,
or flow. Okay.
So flotsam and jetsam are both things that are basically cargo or portions of a ship that go overboard.
Okay.
Flotsam are things that a freighter might lose accidentally in a storm, for instance. A crate goes overboard.
Okay.
If you lose something in a storm accidentally, you still, according to maritime law, you still have ownership rights to it. So you can't actually track it down later on, or if someone saves it, whatever, you still have rights to it. Jetsam is shit you've thrown overboard in a storm intentionally in order to save your life because you think your boat's going down.
Oh.
Jetsam, okay. But if you do that, you are apparently relinquishing your ownership rights to it. And there are companies or people that will, like, the same lunatics that monitor police scanners will pay attention to ships in distress and see if they're throwing shit overboard, and will go out there and try to collect the shit they've intentionally tossed because they've given up their rights to it. So if you've just tossed a Volvo overboard, someone will go out there will go out there and try to find it. So anyway, flotsam and jetsam.
Okay. And it's weird that a band in the middle of Arizona would choose the term flotsam and jetsam.
I know, right? It's makes no fucking sense.
Yeah. Middle of a desert.
So from John O, friend of the pod, he wrote in and said, in my hometown, if you wanted two of something, it was common to say all two, both of them. Both is BOF, not BOTH. So there are a couple donuts left. I want all two, both of them.
All two, both of them.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, not both, not BOTH, BOF. So country life in Texas gives you all kinds of goodness.
I think I know what small town you're talking about.
Yeah, too. I'm sure you
do.
Okay. From law enforcement in Texas, let's say you and I are I don't know, police detectives, and we're looking at photos from a crime scene. I could say to you, perhaps, well, the perpetrator came out and drew his gun in Allen, Texas, for instance, and opened fire, and this person fell up against this wall. Were they DRT? What is it?
Dead right there? Is that right?
That's right.
Okay. All right.
Yeah, that's so someone I know in law enforcement says that's at least a fairly commonly well known.
My second guess was down right there, but
yeah, dead right there.
Okay.
Another at least moderate friend of the pod, Bill S.
Why are you ranking them?
I'm not sure whether this person is a listener or whether I don't know, but Bill wrote in with an expression. I'm sort of dying to know where this came from. His expression was, quote, "He was the finest man to ever shit behind a pair of shoes."
Well, if you shit in front of your shoes, you're going to step in it. So
right. So so logically it makes sense. You definitely want to shit behind a pair of shoes. He was the finest man to ever. I just love that expression. It sounds very F. Scott Fitzgerald to me or something.
And so we continue on, borne back ceaselessly against the tide, shitting behind our shoes.
A couple more that are at least a little bit funny that were from people wrote in. A woman named Barbara offered up the expression, "I can't look up your ass and read your mind," which is kind of funny. I like that one very much. Carolyn wrote in and said, "Butter my buns and call me a biscuit." Sort of a southern, bit of a southern expression. Definite friend of the pod, Ross, wrote in and said, offered up an expression that was a favorite of his mother that she would use for anyone that had bad breath. And the expression was, "You could knock a buzzard off a shit wagon."
The variant we used was buzzard off a gut wagon, but I like shit wagon too.
Yeah. Same basic thing. There is a term, YUNS, yuns. Someone wrote in, and I'm going to go out on a limb here and say that this is not this person's real name, because this came from Pat McGroin. I'm not sure who this really is. Yuns, YUNS. Have you ever heard this before?
YUNS? No.
Yuns, and there is literally nothing that makes me angrier than a country southern twang. But yuns apparently is kind of an Appalachian, but also if you look it up, it's also apparently used in like rural Pennsylvania.
Is it yins like in Pittsburgh? Sorry, go ahead.
No, it's YUNS, but it's used in lieu of y'all. So yuns fixing to go to Walmart. Apparently, it's fairly common instead of
Pittsburgh.
y'all.
The Pittsburgh variant is yins.
Okay. Yeah.
Yep.
Okay.
Yep.
Yeah. So I
if we have any Pittsburghers,
so stupid.
Yuns. Okay.
Yuns. And then I started making myself laugh the other day because I recalled a distant memory from childhood that my eternally sweet, kind, overly generous mother, when she would throw together a list of chores for me to do on the weekend when I was a kid, 8, 10, 12, wash clothes, pick up room, the treat family expression for picking up dog crap. I would have this written on my chore list. Was doggy diamonds.
Just like the David Bowie song.
Dumbest fucking. Could you just write dog? Just write dog shit. That's fine, because doggy diamonds is actually more embarrassing than just writing shit.
Well, thank you to is that our list of folks? Pat McGroin, Ross, Carolyn, Barbara, Bill S.
Yeah.
Unnamed law enforcement officer,
yeah.
John O, John P, Laura, Louisa, Todd. Did I leave someone out early on in the beginning?
I think you got it. Close to everyone.
Thank you, listeners. Thanks for sending those in. That's great. The only contribution I have is the two names when my grandmother couldn't think of your name or someone she's trying to remember the name of. She would look at me and say, "What are you up to, Snag Nasty?" And then when she was trying to remember the name of a friend whose name she couldn't remember, "What happened to your friend? Which one? Old Whistle Dick."
God. Still, way better than Doggy Diamond.
Oh, way better than Doggy Diamond, yeah.
It's time for the Dream Idiot's curse word of the week.
All right. Before we transition, I do have a curse word of the week for you. If you have your email open, I just sent you an email.
Yes, you did. Let's see. Curse word of the week is. You want me to read it out loud?
Sure.
Oh dear God, Aussie wiener.
Curse word of the week this week is Aussie wiener. So you and I laugh at all kinds of incredibly stupid things, and I appreciate that some of the things I find funny are lowbrow. I don't get it's kind of a European thing more than an American thing. I think this propensity to in graffiti or whatever to do the cock and balls, right? It's very, very, very common. During the Tour de France, the Tour de France every year hires a team of painters before the peloton comes through to paint over all the cock and balls and turn them into bicycles or turn them into Eiffel Towers. So
Flowers.
The video footage is TV friendly. So there's not just this endless parade of dicks, right? And it's very common in England as well. The Aussie wiener, I tried looking it up and it did not come up. Someone in a dry lake bed in Victoria in Australia did a cock and balls so big. The picture that you see in the link I sent you was a picture taken from the International Space Station of this dick in a.
The title of the story is colossal drawing of a penis that can be seen from space proves humanity never change.
Thank you, Australia. For someone went out, and I don't know how, on a dry lake bed. I will include the photo in the notes of this 200-foot long cock and balls in Australia. You guys are fucking idiots. Cut it out.
The locals have been aware of it for months. Bravo. Good on you, as they say. Okay. Well, let's talk about something dark and disturbing, Bryan.
Okay, good.
Bryan, I have approximately one scripted joke for this, which I'll get to in a moment. Bryan, this episode is going to drop on May 9th.
Mm-hmm.
2 days after this episode drops, will mark the anniversary of what event that you and I have discussed regularly over the last 27 years. May 10th and 11th will mark the 27th anniversary of what event that you and I have discussed.
27th anniversary.
Mm-hmm.
27th anniversary.
Took place over 2 days.
In 96?
Yep. Shall I break the suspense? The 1996 Mount Everest disaster.
Oh, yes. Oh shit, yeah.
So this is less a minute by minute, blow by blow account of what happened. In a little discussion I'm calling What Happened Up There. Because I think most people probably know about the Everest disaster, in which 8 folks died all at once. 2 clients, 3 guides, and 3 members of the Indo-Tibetan Border Patrol police died in just one fell swoop over 2 days. So let's just talk about some of the main things that we know in what I'm calling What Happened Up There. There were 16 expeditions at least present on Mount Everest in the spring of 96. 16, including a couple solo folks, 3 rather large contingency of climbers. 2 of the biggest were the ones that are most often featured in discussions of this: a New Zealand-based group called Adventure Consultants, led by a man named Rob Hall, and American Scott Fisher's group called Mountain Madness. Also present was David Brashear's IMAX group, the McGillivray Freeman IMAX iWorks expedition, where they were just kicking back and getting natural, man. Maybe sitting on the roof of the world, digging Mr. 2 Feet, because he always played with 2 feet off the ground, man. Just getting natural here, listening to Mr. 2 Feet. That joke makes sense to me, Bryan, and maybe a couple other listeners and anybody else who had a certain late night jazz shift in the early 90s. That was my scripted joke. So essentially what happened is a whole bunch of bad things happened all at once when these folks went up and climbed Mount Everest, and they summited over a period of several hours. And you have read John Krakauer's book Into Thin Air sometime or another.
So, yeah, several times. Yeah.
I've seen the made-for-TV movie. I watched Everest. I've also read Anatoly Bukharev's book, which is more or less a response to Krakauer's book. I've also read David Brashear's book as he's kind of watching from below as what's happening. And I thought what I'd do is just kind of go through a couple of the bad things that happened all at once and just talk a little bit about them. And then I've pulled out 3 haunting episodes from this disaster, and we could just talk about them. One of the biggest problems they faced is that a lot of folks didn't turn around when they were supposed to. I'm sure you remember that. Mm-hmm. They had this hard and fast 2:00 rule that if you weren't at the summit by 2:00, you go back down, despite the fact that you paid thousands of dollars to be on this expedition. Many continued to summit after this deadline. Some were summiting as late as 3:30 when they should have been already on their descent, because a lot of people tended to use their energy on the way up when the way down, according to these experts, can be just as deadly, if not more so, right? With the understanding that I know little about mountaineering, I've just read about it. I never want to do this, never had any desire to do it. I would work at base camp and just watch the mountain from down there if I were doing something like this. Scott Fisher, the leader of the American Mountain Madness group, and the only fatality from that group, which I never remember that. He's the only one who died from that group, the leader of Mountain Madness. He had a mysterious disease since the mid-'80s, which I had forgotten as well, which had degenerated into a chronic liver condition. It produced malaria-like symptoms, and he was noticeably tired on the ascent. Krakauer mentions this in his book, pages 202 to 204. Krakauer himself describes an incident where one climber accidentally cranked his oxygen tank on full blast rather than turning it off as he requested. So suddenly he's in descent and has no oxygen to. Right. A group of climbers, guides, and 2 Sherpas were pulled off course back to the tents by the wind, 11 in all, and they huddled together all night. This group was known appropriately as the Huddle. If you remember that scene where they're down on the South Col and they're pulled away from everybody by the wind, they kept veering off away from the wind, kind of almost unconsciously. It wasn't until the clouds kind of lifted from the storm. Speaking of which, a huge thunderstorm hit the mountain right during the descent. Lapsing Zhangbu was short roping one of his clients, which I can't imagine having to do that, where you short rope someone and you're hiking up the mountain, kind of almost dragging them along, right. Short roping them. Beck Weathers, a pathologist in the Dallas area, had undergone radial keratotomy to correct his vision. Lower barometric pressure affects this. Higher the altitude, the lower the pressure, and worse the eyesight. He had blurred vision for most of the ascent and had to stop about halfway up. He waited because he was instructed to do so by Rob Hall, and he kept waiting and waiting and waiting and waiting. And by the time people figured out, well, there's no one coming down to get him, he was, I think one of the other guides took him down, and it was an arduous task. He ended up being part of the huddle that night. Anatoly Bukharev took a lot of heat for committing what one client called a cut-in run. He was a guide working for Scott Fisher's group. Bukharev, what he did is he summited, and then without oxygen, he made a rapid descent back to the camp, claiming what he did was to rest, hydrate, and prepare to ascend with supplemental oxygen as necessary when the mass of climbers descended. That makes sense. He didn't have a radio. Radio communication on the mountain was a real problem. Bukharev did later make several heroic trips out in the darkness to rescue members from the huddles and others lost in the storm. The South African team, which had been problematic from the beginning on the mountain, another group that was up there, refused the use of their radio to people trying to rescue people on the mountain. They had a very powerful radio and they refused the use of it to other groups. And as I said earlier, all of this, I do not understand. And to this day, I don't think anyone really understands why they refused it. All of this was done in punishing winds in a gale force storm circling at the highest altitudes of Mount Everest. I can't even begin to imagine what was happening. There were people in the tent who didn't help for the search early on. Stu Hutchinson claims he didn't wake Krakauer and the other climbers. Krakauer took a lot of heat, if you remember this, because why weren't you out searching early on? Stu Hutchinson didn't wake Krakauer and the other climbers who finished early because he felt they were, quote, beyond normal exhaustion and didn't want more people out wandering around in the middle of a storm looking for people. He felt it was better to let them recuperate and be there for later. So ultimately, the causes of this were a lack of coordination between groups, lack of oxygen stores, the turnaround time being ignored, the weather. I mean, this amazing storm that hit. And then Krakauer argues that his presence affected the outcome, that everybody knew there was a guy on the mountain reporting for Outside Magazine. And that created this atmosphere of heavier competition between adventure consultants and Mountain Madness, and in general, the commercialization of Everest overall. In that season of 1996, 12 people in total died that season. 8 died on those 2 days. 3 guides, 2 clients, and 3 members of the Indo-Tibetan Border Police, as I said. This was eclipsed in the 2015 season where 22 people died, and which eclipsed the season before in 2014 where 16 people died. 3 quotes that kill me every time when I reread John Krakauer's book, Into Thin Air. Early on, page 8, Krakauer summits. He's one of the first to summit because he got up early and was part of the first group. He turns to look down and realizes there's a single file line to get to the top of the mountain. And there's no way down except to wait for these people to come up so he can get down. And that's when he realizes his oxygen supply is dwindling. And he says, quote, "While you guys are fucking around down there, I'm losing brain cells by the millions." Krakauer has a haunting last meeting with Andy Harris, one of the guides who worked with Rob Hall. He talked with his Kiwi guide. He said, "Screw this, I'm tired of walking this." He slides down a small ice patch, survive, pop up, wave at him from the bottom of the hill, and then wander down to the tents. But then Harris is nowhere to be found. Krakauer reports that, hey, I met Harris just here above the tents. And he figures that Harris must have kept walking past the tents and off the south col at the bottom. But in truth, Harris was already dead. He had died near the summit, most likely, on a ridge near the summit. Krakauer, he figured out months later that he actually talked to someone else, a guy he didn't know, a guy from another expedition named Martin Adams. He was that out of it. He finally talked with Adams, who described a very eerie situation where I met this climber I didn't know, and I slid down this ice patch. It's like, holy shit, I was talking to you. And Adams says, "Oh, so that was you." And all this time, Krakauer had been telling people, no, Andy made it down because I saw him at the South Col. He made it down off the mountain. And so he had told, Andy's family that and all these people that. And this quote just kills me. Martin Adams, who is, I believe he was from Texas, just says to him, "Wow, dude, I think you've got some explaining to do." Explaining is that he was exhausted. He was addled. But how could you mistake this guy who had a sharp Kiwi accent, a guy you've been hanging out with for months, for someone who was like several inches shorter, this other
and from Texas?
he was that debilitated.
Right.
That's from page 220. And of course, Rob Hall was stuck for hours on the summit ridge. He was trying to get his friend and client Doug Henson down. Most likely Andy Harris was with him. He probably had seen both Henson and maybe even Harris die. And he was transmitting via a remote microphone clipped to a shoulder strap. Folks could listen in, and his wife, Jan Harold, was listening to her husband from Christchurch. Quote, this is Jan Harold speaking. "He sounded like Major Tom, like he was floating away. We had talked about the impossibility of being rescued from the summit ridge. Jan herself had been up there on a summiting. trip. We had talked about the impossibility of being rescued from the summit ridge. As Rob himself put it, you might as well be on the moon. And Rob Hall, of course, hung on as long as he could, but died, froze to death that night on the impossible ridge at the summit of Mount Everest.
Mm.
So years later, we are left with what happened up there. And I marvel every time I read this book of the endurance of the people who survived it. And I certainly don't have the kind of courage it takes to get up there and do something like that. And I look at this and say, it's a difference if one thing goes wrong, right? Two things maybe. But when you have this combination of bad things going wrong all at once, it's a wonder more people didn't die, quite frankly. And if it weren't for people like Stu Hutchinson and Anatoly Bukharev going out there into the darkness to find more people,
Mm-hmm.
I mean, they might be pulling everybody off that mountain, or actually nobody off the mountain, because you usually don't pull the dead off the mountain.
Right.
And I know you've got some thoughts about this, because you and I have talked about this many times over the last 20-something years.
Yeah, I'm frankly, I'm stunned that they still allow it. I mean, my understanding is, I recall reading a few years ago that the Nepalese government has radically increased the amount of money that they charge to do it, first of all, and then I know for a fact that at some point over the course of the last 2 or 3 years, they also raised money to clear the path. I mean, because there's clear the path a little bit of debris, and all the Sherpas have to go up there and clean feces off, because there's just shit on the trail all the way up, and by the way, there's also 8, 10, 12 bodies that are just still sitting there. One of them's green boots, pink boots. And I know at one very prominent intersection, I think not very far up, there is a climber who I think is, a Korean or Japanese descent, that is, was sitting in this little, opening, and then froze to death and killed over, and partially covered in ice. But you walk right past, these boots sticking out of the ice. It just strikes me as one of those things that maybe you don't need to do this. I mean, if I was, when I was 30 and young and fit, and someone gave me the money and wanted me to go work at base camp, like, oh yeah, I would have done that, because base camp, I think, is fucking 15,000 feet. I mean, I don't know that I would have had the fitness to even get there, because you're so addled even at that elevation. This just seems like, I mean, I do not understand adrenaline seekers and this whole tempting fate thing. When this happened, I remember reading the interviews with when Rob Hall's family is talking to him up there, and he is so oxygen deprived, and as a result completely stupid, that his wife says, okay, Rob, you're gonna get up and get moving, and then like 20 minutes later, an hour later, he's still sitting there, because he's just, his brain has turned off. And maybe this is, I mean, obviously Nepal, I think, was a poor country, and they're making money off of this. But the people that do this are, I mean, talk about first world problems. I mean, you don't need to do this. Just stay home. We read it, a couple years after it happened, I actually went to an event at the UT campus, because my father and I went to see Beck Weathers, and there in person within a year or two after it happened, missing the end of his nose. The end of his nose had been frozen off, and he had terrible frostbite. So I think he'd had one or both hands amputated, because he had some prosthetic hand now. And in a small auditorium on the UT campus, a couple thousand people there to see him. I walked in there, and I recall as being dumbstruck by the fact that there were no visuals, and there really wasn't so much. There wasn't no presentation. It was just him coming in to talk, and he spoke for a short period of time, and then just took questions. And the whole thing, and this has always been my impression of Krakauer as well. Krakauer and Beck Weathers both. The whole thing is about them. both those guys seem, and I guess everyone who engages in these types of activities seem so wildly self-involved and self-important that I was just sort of blown away by, why are we here listening to you? He seemed to be there for sympathy. Like, dude, yeah, you lost the end of your nose and now you have a metal right hand. You're not dead. You're still a wealthy, prominent Houston. I think Beck Weathers is a doctor of some sort.
Pathologist.
Okay. I mean, I have no sympathy for you. And the whole thing was just, let's talk about me. So I mean, I have very little sympathy for I have tons of sympathy for the guides that did this and sacrificed themselves. I have no sympathy for someone that has an extra 200 grand and decide on a lark they want to summit Everest and then they wandered off in a storm and got killed. No sympathy for these people.
I think that Krakauer does a good job of discussing the class-based issues behind that. He refers to it as the commercialization of, like,
Right.
he talks about how the people that he got along with the most are guys like Doug Hansen, who died at the top,
Mm-hmm.
who worked 2 jobs in construction to afford to be able to do what he did.
Right.
Not to mention the Sherpas who
Mm-hmm. Right.
died, I mean, working for dollars. I mean, just and the commercialization argument says that there are people up there who should not be up there because they can pay for the right to do it.
Right.
And Krakauer has said if there's one thing that ties all of his writings together, it's writing about people who live life on the boundaries of things, people who go out for the wildest extension of human experience, be it climbing or, in the case of like Supertramp in Into the Wild, go out to live on the extremes, Under the Banner of Heaven, who live at the extreme fringes of what is acceptable behavior in society.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, all of his books feature folks like that. And I think he would probably include himself in that group. I've never heard him speak. I don't know. I'm just reading from his own writings, but I think that he carries a certain culpability, and he doesn't embrace it, but he acknowledges his own. Yes, I think he admits his own culpability in what happened up there.
Really.
Yeah, I mean, that's what I get away. That's what I take away from the book.
Hmm.
When he says that my very presence there could have caused what happened. And in a way, I guess it does address it is about me kind of thing.
Right.
But I mean, it's this idea that, I mean, in a way, it's the Heisenberg principle, right? He can't observe this without affecting it. By the very nature of being a journalist,
right, that's true.
His very presence affected the story itself. I just find it an incredibly complicated situation, and so many things went wrong where your decision tree is whittled down to one decision, and that's survive. I mean, you're at the point now where it's like, just stay warm and try to find a way out of it. And I don't know. I mean, I've read this book now 4 or 5 times, and I still marvel at those that survived and still come away with questions as to what happened up there. It's just
right.
It's a very spooky book too, because when he's sitting there reflecting on where exactly Andy Harris died, he says, I could have sworn that was Andy Harris I talked to. I could have sworn.
Mm-hmm.
So, well, when your brain is starved of oxygen, you're going to believe all kinds of shit. What I mean?
And multiple. I mean, it was either Andy Harris or I guess, or I mean, a couple of them, because there was the Japanese woman, Yasuko something.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yep.
I'm spacing on her last name. That I think she was, because she weighed all of 98 pounds.
She died in the huddle. Yeah, she was one of the ones that died over on the South Call. Yeah, in the huddle.
But I mean, a couple of them. I think she was the one that was sort of found a little later on, because at some point she just kind of got up and walked off. I thought, I mean, it's been a long time since I read the book. It was either Harris or one of them had walked off a cliff, which, because they thought they were back home in their own living room. I don't know, who knows, but this just feels like challenging yourself is great, but tempting fate like this, especially when there are innocents around you, just seems so reckless and entitled to me. Like, I just can't imagine engaging in a practice where, even if I had all the money in the world, if a Sherpa died because I wanted to do something cool, I would never get over it.
Well, I'll wrap it up with this. A buddy of mine, my neighbor, good buddy of mine, who I used to torture during Houston Rockets games because he was the oldest ball boy in the NBA. I used to text him on purpose during games to mess with him, like, "Hey man, what are you doing right now?" And he'd just look at his phone and just, um, he liked to skydive. And he's, "Hey, you want to come with me?" I'm like, "Shit, no, I have no desire to jump out of a plane."
I have children.
and he would ask me, "Yeah, you want to do this?" But no, I'm not going to do this. Oh, it's fun. I'm so great, good. I do not want to do this. He had
Send
kids
photos.
Too, And then one day I said, "Well, I used to scuba dive," and he looked at me. He goes, "Scuba dive? You're fucking crazy."
We all have that line.
Okay. What do you mean you boys don't have rattlesnakes in that car? What are you, crazy? Whew, all right.
Yeah, super interesting. Thank you. Yeah, it's a cool story though. I should go back and reread that. It's been 15 years or so.
Yeah, I once said I would reread it every May 10th.
Mm-hmm.
And this year I was like, I reread it and by reread it, I mean, I sped read that sucker for this one, but
it's good. It's fast read.
It got to the point where it was like, some of these characters, you're just like, I remember what happens to this guy and it ain't good. You're just like, but yeah.
He's a meatsicle and he's a meatsicle.
It's just, the Everest movie is quite good. My man crush, Jake Gyllenhaal's in it. It's quite good, but and there was a Taiwanese guy who died because he stepped out of his tent wearing his boot liners. And that was the same spring.
Oh, really?
He stepped out of his tent in his boot liners and just shot off like a rocket down the ice face and just whoop off the side into a crevasse and never seen again. I mean, it was just like, whoa.
Whoops.
That's how quick it can happen. Yeah.
Oh, fuck. All right, folks, there you have it. Another Dream Idiots in the books. Thanks for listening. We appreciate you partaking of our particular brand of stupidity. Hopefully you find it at least moderately entertaining.
Yes, and thank you so much for writing in with your idioms you've picked up from your family or your neighborhood or your part of the country. So go out and have your cow eat some cabbage, bag of 14er.
Like Ted Cruz.
Butter your buns. What was the other one? Go shit behind your shoes.
All those things.
Yeah. And for God's sakes, brush your teeth because you don't want to knock a buzzard off a shit wagon. And while you're at it, give me both of them. Have a good one, everybody.
Thanks. Bye.
Be good to each other.
This is a Rough Tiger production.
Bong bong. Bryan.
Bong bong?
Bong bong.
Bong bong. Good.